So we're going to be looking at creating our assembly of the fixture, and what we're going to do is we're going to use all of the solid part models created earlier of each of the components. We're going to borrow just the solid model and insert it into a separate assembly file to produce both the exploded and the collapsed views. What I have right now open in AutoCAD here is an example of the 5 parts. So each of these represent a separate AutoCAD file with our layout in the paper space. And if we switch over here to the model, you can see the projected 2D orthographic line work. And then as well, we have here, if we take a look at our properties, we actually have the solid. Let's take a look at our layers here. If I turn it on and then zoom in, see if we can actually select it here. Alright, once we have it open like that, what we're going to do is we're going to use WBlock simply to extract the solid model and save it to a separate folder as an individual file. This way we won't pull in the layout information or all this additional line work. So for all of these 5 parts, what you'll do is you'll simply use the WBlock command, type W, enter. Okay, with this dialog box, you want to make sure you're going to use objects as the source. Keep the base point for each of the models as the origin. When you go select the objects, you can use this button right here. Select only the 3D solid. Hit enter to confirm. And then what you'll want to do here is make sure that the method here is just to retain, so we don't change anything in the part files. And then when you look down here at destination for the file name and path, this is where you want to navigate to your project folder. In this case, we're using RARS as an example, and I'm using the WBlocks folder here within the parts folder as a location where I'm going to save just the solid model. So I'll call this one center pin. If I want to make it different or be able to more easily identify it, I'll just call it solid like that. And you could use the same naming method for all the other parts. So you'll just repeat this process, and then keep in mind down here under files of type, you'll see that it's being saved as an AutoCAD 2010 version. Okay, this is where you could also change the version. So just double check the location where you're saving, the file name, and the version, and save, and do that for all 5 parts. Then what you'll be able to do is, as you start a new file based on the mechanical template, what you'll be able to do is, in the paper you'll do your presentation, but first you got to put the model together. So you'll switch over here to model, and then you'll start with some formatting, creating the layers, and also inserting each of those parts. So then after you've WBlocked all the solid models into separate files, you should be able to begin your assembly. You can see here I've got my solid models. Pay attention to the location, and now return to your assembly file. So here we are. I'll go ahead and do a save as, so we could save it into the same location of our project folder. So you can see here are my parts, and this I'll call DC5 fixture assembly. And this file will be the file that contains all the solid models in the 2 different configurations, as well as the B-size layout for presentation. Okay, now the next thing is that as I start to insert these solid models, I want to be able to organize them. Okay, not only that, but I'll also want to eventually control what material is applied to them. Now we can use layers for that purpose, and before we start working with renderings, what we'll be able to do here is simply use a layer color just to distinguish the parts from one another. Okay, so I would recommend that you create a few layers here, for one each for each of the parts. Okay, if you have multiple copies, that's fine. If you wanted to make distinctions between the copies, you could certainly create additional layers for each of the copies, but here we'll just keep it simple. And what I'll do is I'll use something like a $sign to put these layers at the very top. And right now it doesn't really matter what color we use. So I have one for the end plate, I have one for the disc, have one for the spacer, and our corner pins. And then finally the center pin. Alright, now that we have those layers, what you'll do is now you can use insert. Now remember, if you use external referencing, eventually you're going to have to bind the models together. But for right now, we'll just use insert. And so just activate the layer that corresponds to the part that you're going to insert. If we start with the end plate, also think about the way that the assembly is being built. If we just take a quick look here, we can see that if we start with our end plate, we can attach our disc, our spacer, corner pins, and then the remaining components would be one way. And we could be looking at this from a south, west, or southeast isometric. So we'll start with the end plate layer. And by default, you'll notice here we've got the top view. All right, and we could use our navigation wheel here to help us out moving around our model. So we'll come over here to the Insert tab, and what we'll be able to do is use Insert. You can just type I for this. Okay, when you see this dialog, okay, what you'll be able to do here is use Browse. The files are not in our file just yet, so we'll have to browse. Okay, if we browse to the folder where we can locate these parts, we can select them one by one and insert them. Now when you insert these parts, they're going to be considered blocks. So what we want to do is we want to explode them only once. This way we can actually render the drawing views with our solid profile command. So here's the drawing. I'll open it up. In this dialog box, you can see here we'll specify on screen where we want to place it. Remember that if you modeled these parts true size, right, you're not going to want to change their scale. We'll be able to use the viewport to represent scale, but here all the parts are still 1-to-1, so that's exactly how you're going to insert them. But you can also rotate. I prefer to do this once I have it in the model. Now, you can see also here with this dialog box that you can check this box here to make sure that when you insert the part, it's also exploded only once, right? If I click OK here, now what you'll see is when I just go ahead and click anywhere, I should be able to zoom extent and see where my component dropped into, and understand that the insertion point is based on the original file where that solid was developed with respect to the origin, right? Now once you have it in here, you can move it around, you can rotate it. Let's bring in everything first. Okay, we have the end plate here, and you'll see now if we take a look at an ISO view, right? If you look at in the top left-hand corner of your drawing window, we can change the visual display style here to conceptual. Now, remember, if we take a look at our layers here, you'll see that my end plate layer is a different color than what I see here. Once you bring it in, remember that these objects were on their own layer, right? So if I select it here and take a look at the properties, you can see that it still resides on its original 3D layer. So just make sure you double check this property, and we should get it onto the correct end plate layer. But also you'll notice that if you hover right over it, it's recognized as a solid, and this way you'll know that it's not still a block reference. Alright, let's continue. So if I bring in everything, then I can arrange what layer they go on. So let's do that quickly. Let's go with the disk. And again, you'll notice that the way I set up the defaults here, each time I do the insert, it'll retain the defaults until I change it. So I'll click OK, and just click anywhere to bring in the disk. Let's continue. Let's browse. Let's bring in the spacer. Click OK, just place it anywhere for now. Again, we'll insert, and we need the corner pin, and then finally the center pin. So I just about have all my parts together here. Okay, and now we can simply select each one, and we can double check here. You can see it's a solid, and then we could use our properties to assign it to the correct layer. So there's the corner pin. We select this one here. We're going to show our spacer. Grab our disk here. Do the same thing. And then finally, center pin. Okay, so we got everything in our model space. A couple of things that we want to pay attention to. Now you'll notice here the visual display of those curved edges, right? They start to get choppy. One thing you want to do is make sure this is a separate file. You want to make sure that the visual quality of your solids remains the same as in the original. So check your facet resolution variable, face trace, and make sure you bump it up to 10 would be good. We have a low quantity of components in this assembly, so that would be fine. Let's zoom extents back. Let's take another look here at our sample drawing. Alright, we consider this the face or the front of the assembly. Then you can see the way that we're going to align and put together each of these component parts. Now let's take a look at how we can use both the navigation tools to work around our models as we are assembling them, maintaining the correct orientation. We'll use regular 2D move, but we'll also take a look at 3D align.